All right, so welcome to Chapter 10, Part D. We're going to talk about covering the autonomic nervous system. We'll explore how the ANS manages involuntary functions and maintains homeostasis in the body. So when we talked about the PNS, or the peripheral nervous system, that was divided into sensory and motor divisions. And then the motor division was split into a somatic nervous system, which is the voluntary control of skeletal muscles, and then the autonomic nervous system, which is involuntary control of your cardiac muscles, smooth muscles, glands, right? Things you don't have to think of, they just are working on their own without your conscious effort. So, although both systems have motor fibers, they differ in that the effectors they control. So the SNS for skeletal muscles and the ANS is for visceral organs, right? Internal organs. And the pathways and neurotransmitters they use are different. And then the degree of voluntary control with the ANS functioning is involuntary. So this chart breaks that down. And so you can see the differences between the autonomic and the somatic. So remember, autonomic is involuntary, it's just doing it on its own without you thinking, and somatic is where you are consciously telling your body to move or to do something. Okay, so here is what the differences in the nervous system looks like for each of those, for the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. So they are a little bit different there as well, as you can see. All right, so there is some overlap. The higher brain centers regulate both the somatic and the autonomic systems with coordinating responses. So, for example, active skeletal muscles require more oxygen, so the ANS increases heart rate and opens the airways so that they can meet this need. All right, so homeostasis depends largely on the ANS, okay? It plays a critical role in homeostasis by regulating blood flow, adjusting heart rate and blood pressure, modifying body temperature, and then controlling digestive secretions. These actions are automatic and they ensure balance without any conscious effort. So, motor nerves that control the voluntary actions of skeletal muscles are sometimes called the somatic nervous system. But the automatic nervous system conducts impulses from the central nervous system to cardiac muscles, smooth muscles, glands, epithelial tissue, regulating automatic or involuntary um, involuntary functions. So automatic or visceral effectors um, are tissues which automatic neurons conduct impulses. So what are autonomic effectors? They're tissue to which the autonomic neurons conduct impulses to cardiac and smooth muscle and glandular epithelium. The autonomic pass to visceral effectors consist of two neuron relays. Impulses travel over a preganglionic neurons from the spinal cord or the brainstem to the autonomic ganglia, where they are relayed across the synapses to the ganglion neurons, which then conduct the impulses from ganglion to the visceral effectors. So in contrast with the somatic motor neurons, they conduct all the way from the spinal cord to the brainstem to the somatic effectors with no intervening synapses. So remember when we talked last week about nerves, we saw the nerves that just flow along the axon, and then we saw how synapses work, right? So how the nerve impulses flow through the synapse. It releases those transmitters to go to the next synapse to help that transition and help that signal continue on. So that we can look back at this picture here, right? So here's the ganglion. So the nerve is sending a signal from the spinal cord to the ganglion. Then there's that synapse right here, right? That has that transfer of information into the new postsynapse. And then it continues that signal on to the gland or the cardiac muscle or the smooth muscle that's trying to affect. Versus with the somatic nervous system, it's just one straight line. The signal just follows the axon directly to the skeletal muscle without stopping in a ganglion with the synapses. Oh, too far. Okay, so with the autonomic nervous system is composed of two divisions, the sympathetic system, or SANS, and the parasympathetic, which is PANS. So autonomic paths to the visceral effectors, so organs, consist of those two neuron relays, while somatic motor neurons have no intervening synapses. So the SANS, or the sympathetic nervous system, it mobilizes body during stress, so fight or flight, right? So you can see the picture, the hiker, he comes across a bear, that's going to activate his fight or flight, or SANS, sympathetic system. The parasympathetic system, or PANS, promotes rest and digestion. So you can see the man sitting here watching TV, just resting. Maybe he's just eating after a meal, letting his food digest while he sits there and watches TV. So both divisions innervate the same organs, but produce opposite effects to help maintain that balance, or that hemostasis. So in this figure, it shows the innervation of the major target organs by the autonomic nervous system. The sympathetic pathways are highlighted with the orange, and the parasympathetic pathways are highlighted in the green. All right, so division of the autonomic nervous system. It mobilizes the body during activity. With the sympathetic division mobilizes it during activity. Again, that fight or flight. Parasympathetic promotes maintenance functions, conserves energy, right? Helps with digestion, like we talked about. All visceral organs are served by both divisions, but these divisions, they have opposite effects. This dynamic's called antagonism between the two divisions, and to help maintain that balance. So just think of yin and yang, right? You have to have both. So the functions of the sympathetic nervous system, so your fight or flight, right? So this is when you're in an emergency, your system is stressed. It's controlling those visceral effectors during exercise or strong emotions. So anger, fear, hate, anxiety are triggered. So what happens? So the physiological changes that are associated with fight or flight. So when you're in that fight or flight mode, your heart beats faster, blood vessels constrict to cause blood pressure to increase, blood vessels in the muscles dilate, And that's to help get more oxygen to those muscles in case you need to flight, right, and run. Um, Sweat glands and adrenal glands secrete more abundantly. Salivary and other digestive secretions are more sparingly. So your body's trying to conserve energy and bring that energy to your muscles. So it tells your body, we're not digesting anything right now because we need that energy to go to the muscles so we can get out of here and out of this dangerous situation, right? And then so that we can be ready for that fight or flight. So some other things that can happen, we talked about the increased heart rate, increased respiration rate, our pupils dilate, so we can have better vision. And then again, we reduce our digestive activity so we can use that energy for our muscles. So some of the functions of the parasympathetic nervous system is if a person gets frightened by someone chasing them, here's all the things that we've talked about in that last slide that would happen as well. So conversely, when we're looking at the parasympathetic nervous system, that's during rest, right? So it encourages lower heart rate and respiratory rates, increased digestion activity, and then energy conservation for future needs is often referred to as rest and digest system. All right, so back to the sympathetic nervous system. We have the dendrites and the cell bodies of the sympathetic preganglion neurons, which are located in the gray matter of the thoracic and upper lumbar segments of the spinal cord. So the structure of the sympathetic nervous system, it's also referred to as the thoracolumbar system. So this is when the axon leaves the spinal cord in the anterior or the ventral root of the spinal nerve, enters the spinal nerve, and then leaves, but soon leaves as it extends to and through the sympathetic ganglion and terminates in the collateral ganglion. So think back in chapter 10C, those pictures that we were looking at, right, of the spinal cord and where those ganglions are. So it leaves and extends through a sympathetic ganglion and terminates in the collateral ganglion, where it synapses with several postganglionic neurons whose axons extend and terminate to visceral effectors. So visceral again is internal organs and the effectors of the internal organs. All right, so the parasympathetic nervous system dominates the control of a lot of your organs, right, under normal everyday conditions. And it counterbalances that sympathetic system, right? So it helps the body energy be used as low as possible just to maintain that energy while still having our normal maintenance activities, right? It's known as rest and digest. So the functions of the parasympathetic nervous system differ in that it dominates control of the visceral effectors during normal everyday conditions. Impulses tend to slow heartbeat. You have increased peristalsis and increased secretion of digestive juices and insulin. So here's an example of that person relaxing, reading after a meal. Here's all the symptoms that you would see during this phase as well. And then here is the nerves and where they're located. So in the parasympathetic nervous system, the dendrites and cell bodies of the sympathetic preganglion neurons are located in the gray matter of the brain and the sacral segments of the spinal cord, right? So at the top of the spinal cord and at the bottom of the spinal cord, that's where the parasympathetic nervous system lies. All right, so there are three key anatomical differences between SANS and PANS. The origin of the fibers. So in SANS, it comes from the thora thoracolumnar region, which is the T1 to L2 region. PANS comes from the cranial sacral region, so the brain and the sacral spinal cord, right? The top of the spinal cord to the bottom of the spinal cord, basically. Fiber lengths. So SANS are very short preganglionic, but then it has very long postganglionic, where PANS has long preganglionic and short postganglionic. And you can see the pictures that we have there below each one to see that difference. So, and then the ganglion locations are different. For SANS, it's near the spinal cord, and with PANS, it's near or within the target organ. Okay. So here is another comparison of the two SANS and PANS and where they're located and where they go. All right, so SANS is anatomically more complex. It does innervate more organs. It does supply some glands and smooth muscles that the PANS does not. So sweat glands, erectile pili muscles, and the kidneys all come from SANS rather than PANS, which is the autonomic system. So autonomic transmitters, those are chemicals that continue a nerve impulse through the synapse. Okay. So you have three axons. You have the sympathetic preganglionic axon, the parasympathetic preganglionic axon, and the parasympathetic postganglionic axon. And these release acetylcholine. Okay. And these axons are classified as cholinergic fibers. All right, so there's only one type of the autonomic axon that releases a neurotransmitter, norepinephrine, and this is the axon of a sympathetic postganglionic neuron. And these neurons are classified as adrenergic fibers, axons, okay? What determines the nature of an organ's response to a stimuli is by the autonomic nervous system. And this is both cholinergic and adrenergic fibers. Just to break it down even more, cholinergic fibers, they release acetylcholine. Okay, it's found in both systems in preganglionic axon and PANS postganglionic axon. Okay, adrenergic fibers, they release norepinephrine, and they're found in the SANS postganglionic axons. Okay. When we look at this figure, it illustrates the autonomic neurotransmitters. So 3 of the 4 fiber types are the cholinergic, which is secreting the neurotransmitter acetylcholine into the synapse. Um, Only the sympathetic postganglionic fiber is adrenergic, and it secretes norepinephrine into the synapse. Okay, so there are two types of cholinergic receptors that bind the acetylcholine. Okay, so you have nicotine receptors, which always are stimulatory, and they're found on postganglionic neurons. Then you have muscarinic receptors, and these can be excitatory or inhibitory, depends on the target organ. So it can slow the heart rate, but it can increase intestinal activity. As just an example. With the nicotine receptors, it's found on all postganglionic neurons of the parasympathetic system. The sarcoma of the skeletal muscle cells at the neuromuscular junction, somatic. It's not automatic. It affects the acetylcholine at the nicotine receptors, and it's always stimulatory. Okay. Again, with the muscarinic receptors, is found on all effector cells stimulated by postganglionic cholinergic fibers. So its effect on the acetylcholine receptors can be, again, either inhibitory or excitatory. It depends on that target organ. So the example of either slowing the heart rate, which is inhibitory, or increasing binding to intestinal smooth muscles, which is excitatory, increasing, right? All right, so the adrenergic receptors respond to norepinephrine or epinephrine. Okay, and we're going to talk a lot about norepinephrine and epinephrine when you get into pain management, because that is included in our anesthetics for a reason. Oh, so there's two major classes for norepinephrine and epinephrine. You have your alpha receptors, which causes smooth muscle contraction, so vasoconstriction, because our blood vessels are smooth muscle. And this is why it's important in pain management, because when we are giving anesthetic, we want to keep the anesthetic in that localized area. So we add epinephrine to help constrict the blood vessels in that area so that the drugs, the anesthetic, doesn't be washed away into our system through the blood, right? It keeps it there. It also helps to inhibit norepinephrine release. Then we have beta receptors, which helps to increase the heart rate and force contraction. Okay. Which we also will talk about in pain management. A side effect of epinephrine or norepinephrine in our anesthetic is that if you inject your anesthetic into a blood vessel, it's going to send that anesthetic and the epinephrine in that anesthetic to your heart, and you may have patients who say they have their heart starts racing and beating really fast. That's an effect of the epinephrine in the anesthetic. And it only lasts a short time, maybe a minute before it goes away. But that is an effect of the epinephrine as well. All right, so with the adrenergic receptors, with the A receptors, again, it mediates smooth muscle contraction, so vasoconstriction, and it inhibits the release of norepinephrine from the axon terminals. Then in your B receptors, it stimulates the heart rate, it increases your heart rate and force of contractions. Okay. All right, so tone. Tone refers to the baseline activity of the systems. So SANS maintains blood vessel tone, which is adjusting the constriction to regulate blood pressure. Okay, PANS dominates the heart, digestive, and urinary systems, and it ensures normal functioning unless it's overridden by SANS during stress. Okay, so PANS is going to keep everything running normal, functioning at our normal heart rate, our normal urinary system, normal digestive tract, unless we get in that fight or flight mode, then SANS will take over and either increase the heart rate, increase, our breathing, decrease our digestion, and so that it can use the energy where it needs to be used. So when we think about blood pressure, if blood pressure is too low, it's the vasomotor fibers fire more rapidly to constrict it. If blood pressure is too high, vasomotor fibers fire less rapidly to help dilate those muscles, those smooth muscles in the blood vessels. All right, so cooperative effects. So the SANS and PANS, they can work together. So for example, PANS promotes blood flow for like erections in the genitalia, right? Where SANS facilitates the ejaculation and vaginal contraction. So that's how they work together. The unique roles of the sympathetic division. The SANS has additional functions such as like regulating body temperature through blood vessels, blood vessel dilation or constriction, sweat production. It releases renin from the kidneys to increase blood pressure, mobilizing fat and glucose for energy during stress. Some other unique functions. Um, those are all some other unique functions that happen just with the SANS or the sympathetic division. Other things is metabolic effects. So it can increase metabolic rates of cells. It can raise blood glucose levels and it can metabolize fats for use of fuel. So if we're needing more energy to help us get out of that fight or flight situation, it's gonna help convert those fats into fuels. All right, so the autonomic nervous system is regulated by the central nervous system, which is the brain, right? So the brainstem and spinal cord, they control our heart rate, blood vessels, blood vessel diameter, and digestion. The hypothalamus is the main integrative center for the autonomic activity, which makes it so we don't have to think about it, right? It just happens. And the cerebral cortex helps provide limited voluntary influence, such as controlling breathing patterns, right? So most of the time when we're breathing, it's just happening automatic. But we can control if we hold our breath. We can control voluntarily how fast or slow we breathe as well, right? So it doesn't um, can't do that with our heart. We can't tell our heart to stop beating for a minute and then start again, or we can't tell it to beat faster or slower, right? That's all influenced by either the uh, SANS or PANS. But breathing, even though it happens most of the time automatically, we can have some control over that. Controls of the autonomic function, so cortical controls are connections of the hypothalamus to the limbic lobe, which allows that cortical influence on the ANS. Voluntary cortical control of some visceral activities is possible, like we talked about with the lung. So you just have to be aware of those physiological conditions and the goal of continuously influencing them. Okay, so disorders. Because both the nervous system and the endocrine system are involved with stress disorders, these disorders are usually referred to as neuroendocrine disorders. Stress or abnormal ANS activity can lead to conditions like hypertension, which is high blood pressure, and that can happen with prolonged SANS activation. You can have digestive issues like ulcers, or reduced blood flow to the stomach. And you can also have a weakened immune system, with chronic stress impacts disease resistance. With neuroblastoma, it's a highly malignant tumor that affects the sympathetic nervous system, most often in children. It can cause symptoms like increased heart rate, sweating, and hypertension due to excessive SANS activation. All right, so here is our quiz clues. So this concludes our presentation. Be sure to look over these to prepare for your quiz. You want to focus on, functions of the cranial nerves, differences between SANS and PANS, neurotransmitters, the receptors, the key roles of ANS and associated disorders. And also remember to go back and focus on chapter 10, part C and D is what will be on the quiz this week. All right. Good luck, everyone.